All right. So we have been in this series all about friendships. We're wrapping it up tonight. But as we start and we talk about friendships, if I mention like iconic duos or great duos, I don't know where your mind initially goes. There's a lot of great and iconic duos out there. What? Mike and Brian. Yeah, that's definitely up there. Mario and Luigi are one, right? SpongeBob and Patrick. Got to be up there, Batman and Robin. But when I think about some elite duos, like some top tier duos, there's a few that rise to the top of my list. Here's the first one. All right. So, I mean, I don't really know who put that in there, but some might say like we're a pretty good duo. I don't know. But the next one we got Timon and Pumbaa, obviously a elite duo. The next one we have Marlin and Dory. I mean, they go through it all together. Like they're definitely at the top of the list of duos. The next one is probably one of my favorites, Troy and Chad. Any High School Musical fans out there? Like their relationship goes through it all, but they're just a great duo. The next one, if you've seen the original Top Gun, then you would recognize these guys, Maverick and Goose. They're partners. They go through it all. They ride together, all that stuff. Spoiler alert. No spoiler alerts. Just watch the first one. But if you haven't seen the first one, the second movie, you probably recognize these guys a little bit more. Maverick and Rooster being Goose's son. If you haven't seen those movies, I would highly recommend it. But they're an iconic and a great duo. And as silly as some of those examples are, the reality is that they're all dynamic duos on some level, right? They have some type of relationship and bond, and they do some pretty cool things together. So the question that I want you to think about as we get started is how can my friend and I become a dynamic duo? Okay, and I know that's like a little bit of a weird question and different, but really, like how can your friend and you become a dynamic duo? The reality is that some of you probably have a lot of friends. All right, you have a lot of people that you consider to be your friends, but all of us probably have one, two, maybe three people that we would say are like our best friends. Like they are our best friends. And so the question and what I want us to think about and talk about tonight is how can we take that relationship to the next level? Like how can we take that friendship with our best friend to the next level? How can we maximize the potential of what that relationship could actually be? I really feel like I do have a word for you guys tonight, and so I would challenge you to really lean in, because I think if you do lean in and you listen and you actually take this and try to apply it to your life, then I really think that you might see some pretty incredible differences and growth and transformation that might come from your friendships. And in all honesty, I do think that you and your friend could become this type of dynamic duo that we would all want. And so I just challenge you to lean in tonight because I think I have something for you guys. And so we're going to start in Mark chapter 9. Should be in the Bible app. You can follow along. It's always on the screen. But we're going to work through this story that we see in Mark chapter 9, starting in verse 30. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit of it, and we're going to talk about it and just move through it that way. But Mark 9, 30 through 32, this is what it says. Leaving that region, they traveled through Galilee. Jesus didn't want anyone to know he was there, for he wanted to spend more time with his disciples and teach them. He said to them, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of his enemies. He will be killed, but 3 days later he will rise from the dead. But they didn't understand what he was saying, however, and they were afraid to ask him what he meant. So Jesus and his disciples are on this journey, and the ultimate final destination that they're on, where they're really traveling and going to, is Jerusalem. And this is because this is the place that Jesus is going to be betrayed and persecuted and crucified. And so they're taking this journey, and that's the final destination. That's where they are ultimately trying to go. And sorry, I lost my place. And as they're headed there, Jesus tells them this. He says, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of his enemies. He'll be killed, but 3 days later he will rise from the dead. Now this is pretty big news. Right? Like really, this is massively huge news that Jesus tells them about, and he lets them in on this little secret for the second time. And so the first time happened a chapter previously in Mark chapter 8. And when Jesus tells them this in Mark chapter 8, Peter is just like not having it. Like he goes off on Jesus and he reprimands him and he gets all mad and he's just not on board with what's going on here. But this time, when Jesus tells them what's going to happen, they just don't understand. They don't understand what he's saying, but then they also don't ask what he means. But then as we continue to move through this story, their response to this news that Jesus shared with them actually gets much worse. Picking up in verse 33, it says, after they arrived at Capernaum and settled in a house, Jesus asked his disciples. So they get to where they're going. Jesus asked his disciples, what were you discussing out on the road? But they didn't answer because they had been arguing about which one of them was the greatest. And so he sat down, he called the 12 disciples over to him, and he said, whoever wants to be first must take last place and be the servant of everyone else. Question for you, have you ever had a moment in your life when you shared some really big news, maybe some really exciting news with people, and they just didn't respond or react in the way that you expected or hoped that they would respond? Okay, this happened for my family very recently. So my older sister, she told us that she's pregnant, she's going to have another kid. And when she told us this, the whole family couldn't get together. And so initially it was Ashley and I and my parents and then her family. And they decided to still tell us, and it was awesome. And then the next day they saw my older brother and they told him. But my younger brother, he goes to school in Alabama, and they wanted to tell him, obviously, but they didn't want to wait until he came back home. So they decided to send a text, and they sent a picture of, they have a daughter, and they sent a picture of their daughter with like it says big sister onesie, and she's holding like no, she's holding the ultrasound. Yes, she's holding the ultrasound. And they sent it in there, and they're like, big family update. I have a picture of it. And so they send this family update for Sutton. And then here's my brother's response. He says, congratulations, guys, with one exclamation mark. Like his sister is about to have a baby, and he gives congratulations, guys, with one exclamation mark. Like I can't get all caps. I can't get 2 exclamation marks. I can't get any emojis or like a GIF or any excitement. It's like he doesn't even care that this is going on. Not the kind of response that you would want or expect with something big like this. Jesus, he tells these guys the biggest news that he could have ever told them, and the response is really terrible. They don't understand, which is fine, but they don't ask about it. They don't inquire about it. But then to make matters worse, they start fighting about who's better than the other one. And so eventually they change the topic and they start talking about themselves like they don't even care what Jesus shared with them. And I don't know about you, but if I'm Jesus in this moment, like I'm probably going to start raging on these guys. Like I'm going to give them the business. Like, listen here, I'm literally on my way to go get tormented and tortured and killed for you, and you don't even care, and all you care about is who's got bigger muscles in the group. Like who the alpha of the group is, who the greatest among them is. Now here's the deal. Obviously, Jesus did not respond in that way. He responded in a very different way. But before we dive into that a little bit, I want to help us make sure we understand a little bit more that will play into this. Jesus and these disciples would have been really good friends at this point. Okay? The disciples were chosen by Jesus to be his students, right? And so Jesus is the teacher, they're the students. He chose them at the beginning of his ministry. And so for the last 3 years, they would have been following him around. They would have been experiencing a lot of things, learning from him. They would have been spending pretty much all of their life with him for the last 3 years. And so they would have really developed a love and a care for each other, and they would have become really good friends at this point. They had a deep level of love and care for each other. And so I think that's important because I think we can learn a lot about the type of friend that we need to be and the type of friend that we're called to be by the way that Jesus responds to this situation in this story. Okay, and the first thing that I want us to see is the way that Jesus humbles himself. Okay, Jesus humbles himself. Again, think about this. Try to put yourself into Jesus' shoes. Jesus tells them some pretty important, pretty big information, and it's like they don't even care. Right? They're caught up in their own little world. They're worrying about the wrong things. Literally on the same walk, the same journey that Jesus tells these guys he's going to die for them and raise again, they're over there arguing about who's better than the other one. Forget about what Jesus said. It's all about me, and me. And the disciples, it's in this moment, they're probably acting a little bit selfish and prideful and arrogant. And like I said, I would have got really mad, would have raged on them and said some things I shouldn't have. And I think that we all probably would have understood if Jesus responded in that way, like if he would have got upset with them and tried to make a point out of them or use them as an example or whatever it was. But what does Jesus do? He humbles himself. He says, okay, it doesn't have to be about me right now. And that's okay. He doesn't make a big deal out of the situation like he so often does. Jesus, he lowers himself and he takes the attention and the spotlight off of himself because he doesn't need to be the center of attention. It doesn't need to be all about him. But not only does Jesus humble himself, he also elevates the disciples. And so Jesus elevates the disciples. Jesus, he asks them what they're talking about, and they don't answer because they're embarrassed about it. And then after that, what is the very next thing that Jesus does? Like, what is the very next thing that Jesus does in this story? It says this: he sat down. So after all this, we get to this point, and it says Jesus sat down. Now, this is a stretch, and I debated using this example, but Jesus sitting down here is kind of like the equivalent of LeBron throwing up the chalk before the game. Okay, I don't know if there's any LeBron fans or if you've seen this, but LeBron, before his games, he always goes over to like the scores table and puts this chalk in his hand, and then he throws it up. And you know what it means when Jesus throws this chalk, or not Jesus, oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. You know what it means when LeBron throws this chalk in the air? It means that it's game time. Right? Like it's go time, it's game time, it's time for him to do what he does, it's time for him to play. And Jesus sitting down actually has a lot of significance because in this moment, Jesus is about to do what he does best. It's time for him to do what he does best. It's time for him to teach. You see, rabbis in this time, when they were going to teach, they would actually sit down. And so Jesus, he sits down in this moment, he calls them over, and he starts to teach them. He doesn't rage, he doesn't get mad, he doesn't go off on them, he teaches them. And here's the part that really sticks out to me. With that same verse, it says, he sat down, he called the 12 disciples over to him, and he said, whoever wants to be first must take last place and be the servant of everyone else. Whoever wants to be first. Now, what was it that the disciples were arguing about on the road? Who was first? Right? Who was the greatest? That's exactly what they were arguing about and trying to figure out on the road. And so instead of responding how a normal human being probably would have responded in this moment, Jesus says, look, you want to be great? Let me tell you how it's done. Let me tell you how to get there. Very simply, Jesus, he humbles himself by taking the spotlight off of himself, and he elevates the disciples by putting the spotlight on them. Instead of making the conversation all about him, he shifts the focus and he makes the conversation about them. He gives them the attention. He gives them the spotlight. He puts their interests and their needs and their desires above his own. He takes the time to teach them and to help them grow. They wanted to be great, and so Jesus, he gives them the key to greatness. They were so consumed with this idea of being great that they didn't even take the time to acknowledge the truth that Jesus was saying to them. But Jesus, in such a humble way, he elevates them and gives them what they want. But this is also something that Jesus had modeled for them the last 3 years, and he would continue to model for them, because don't be confused, through that statement, through that verse, Jesus, he's still talking about the cross. All right, he's still talking about this cross. This statement, this verse is still pointing to the cross, because the reality is that Jesus did this exact thing. Jesus took last place. He lowered himself. He put himself beneath everyone. He put everyone else and everyone's needs above his own. And in the greatest act of love and servanthood that there ever was in the entire world, he died on a cross. Ultimate last place. But don't get it twisted, because then he was in last place, but then he was elevated, and now he sits at the right hand of the Father in the place of honor in first place. He lived out this exact verse. Jesus told them how to be great, but he also showed them. When I was in college, I was going into my junior year, And I was going to be in more of a leadership role on the basketball team, and really my whole life, but especially in my college career, I'd been someone that had always just done the right thing. Like I always did the right thing. I prided myself on being the hardest worker. I prided myself on showing up every day and doing what I was supposed to inside and out of practice, just setting the example. But I was very much focused on myself. Like I was making sure that I was doing all the right things, but I was focused just on myself. And going into my junior year, I'm sitting in the locker room, and one of my coaches is in there, and we're talking. And he said something to me that I'll never forget, and it really challenged me. But he said, this year, your success will be determined by the growth of others. He said, your success as a leader and as a teammate will be determined by the growth of others. Let me ask you something tonight. How successful of a friend would you be in these terms? Now, I know it's weird to kind of evaluate how good or how successful of a friend you are, but how successful of a friend would you be in these terms? Like, is your friend a better person because you're in their life? Being a real friend means that you'll shift your eyes off of yourself and you'll focus on them. The spotlight comes off of you and it goes on to other people. Being a real friend means that you're more concerned about others than you are about yourself. If you remember anything from tonight, I hope it's that we need to humble ourselves and we need to elevate others. That's really what tonight is all about. It's not only the key to greatness, but I believe it's really the key to being a great friend. We have to get to the place in our relationships where it's not about us. We have to become the kinds of people that will put the needs and the wants and the desires and the success of their friends above ourselves. Where we think about our friends, and when we think about our friends, the first thing that we think about is, how can I love them today? Or how can I serve them today? Or how can I make their day better? Or how can I help them grow? How can I help them become more successful? Like, we're just so others focused. We're thinking about ways that we can uplift them and encourage them. And this is what Jesus modeled for us in these verses. He humbles himself and he elevates his friends. He humbled himself when he really had every right to exalt himself. He had every right to make it about himself and bring the attention to himself and elevate himself, but instead he focused on other people and he put the spotlight on them. And so let me ask you, who's the spotlight on in your life? Who's the spotlight on in your life? And hear me say this with love, but the reality is, if you're living your life and all you think about is yourself, and all you're consumed with is yourself, and all you worry about is yourself, and all the focus of your life is yourself, then you're probably not a good friend. Right? We're called to focus on other people and to put the spotlight and the emphasis on them. Not only did Jesus elevate his friends in this moment, but he also taught them and helped them grow. He genuinely cared about their success and he cared about the direction that they were headed. And I feel like if I could give one verse that kind of sums up tonight and how we're supposed to live and go forward from this, it's Hebrews 10:24. It says, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds." And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. What would it look like for you to do this in your relationships? What would it look like for you to encourage and motivate your friends to live more like Jesus? What would happen if your group of friends actually and genuinely cared about the success and the growth of each other, and so you're pushing them, but they're pushing you back, and you're encouraging them, but they're encouraging you back, and you guys are sharpening each other like iron sharpens iron? What if you're surrounded by a group of people that walked into the relationships not thinking, what can I get out of this relationship, but what can I give to this relationship? Not thinking, how can this relationship benefit and serve me, but how can I help you? How can I give to you through this relationship? I think that's what it looks like to be a real friend and the kind of friend that Jesus was. I was in the last few weeks of my senior year of college. At this point, I'm like checked out. I'm ready to graduate and be done. And one of the managers on the basketball team asked me to get lunch with him. So I got lunch with him, and we're chatting and just checking in. And towards the end of the conversation, he looks at me and he said, he just like started thanking me for the impact that I've had on him. And he said, I wouldn't be the person that I am if it wasn't for you. And I don't tell you that story to make you think that I'm some amazing person. I really actually debated telling that story because I don't want you to get the wrong idea from this. But I tell you this story because, like, how sweet would it be if in 3 or 4 years, the person that you're sitting next to right now calls you up and they're like, hey, I've just been thinking and reflecting lately, and I just wanted to say thank you. Because I would not be the person that I am if it wasn't for you. Like, how sweet would that be if our friend would say that to us? Real friends, they care about the success of others. Real friends care about the growth of others, and real friends will humble themselves to elevate the people around them.